The Warrens' occult museum had always been a place of whispered dread. Tucked away in the heart of Connecticut, it was less a museum and more a mausoleum of evil, a prison for the damned. Behind locked glass cases and holy wards, cursed relics stared from the shadows, each one carrying a history of suffering, torment, or death. But among them, one artifact pulsed with a malice that was never silent. Annabelle. The doll sat motionless, her cracked porcelain face illuminated only by the dim orange glow of a single bulb. Her painted eyes seemed to follow anyone who dared to look too long. A cross hung over her, a sign of resistance against the evil it barely contained. Visitors never knew the full truth. What sat behind that glass was no ordinary doll. It was the prison of something ancient and foul, Malthus, a demon of hunger and despair, bound but never destroyed. And that night, the prison door opened. The thief was not ignorant. He came prepared. Blessed gloves, a sack soaked in holy oil, prayers muttered under his breath as if words could shield him from what he was stealing. His Romanian accent cracked with fear as he whispered, "Forgive me, Lord, but I must do this." He wasn't stealing for greed, but for obedience. Orders had been given. Across the ocean, whispers had promised wealth, power, and salvation for his family if he could bring the doll back to his homeland. He didn't know who had whispered, only that they spoke through dreams, voices that were not human. The air thickened as he unlocked the case. The crucifix rattled against its nail. A deep chill spread from the doll's glass box, coating the thief's lungs in frost. Every instinct screamed for him to stop, to flee. But his shaking hands lifted Annabelle anyway, wrapping her in the blessed sack. And in that moment, the silence broke. The walls trembled as if the house itself recoiled. The thief heard scratching from inside the bag, like nails scraping against the fabric. Then came the laugh, small, faint, childlike, but so filled with venom it made his stomach twist. His hands almost dropped her, but he forced himself forward, out the museum's door and into the night. The Warrens were not home. Lorraine had been plagued by visions for days, images of a dark cathedral, blood running over stone, and the sound of women screaming prayers to no god she recognized. She felt something was coming but could not place where or when. By the time she awoke in the middle of the night, the damage was already done. The doll was gone. The journey to Romania was plagued with horrors the thief dared not name. On the cargo ship across the Atlantic, sailors whispered of footsteps in the hull at night, of giggles in the dark corners of the hold where no one should be. Rats were found skinned alive. One sailor slit his own throat after claiming the doll had whispered his dead mother's voice through the walls. By the time the ship reached the port of Constanza, the thief no longer slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips dry, his prayers nothing but cracked whispers to a God he no longer believed was listening. He delivered Annabelle into waiting hands, hooded men in robes the color of grave soil. They carried her not with reverence, but with trembling dread. Deep in the Romanian countryside, the land awaited her. And it was not ordinary land. It was a country scarred by centuries of superstition, shadow, and old faith. Where crosses stood broken and churches hid secrets older than the priests who served them. It was Valak's territory. The nun. The defiler. The demon who wore the veil of holy flesh as mockery. Already, villagers spoke of strange omens, candles that would not light in monasteries, livestock born with no eyes, the cries of unseen women echoing from the woods. It was as if Romania itself had been waiting for Annabelle's arrival, an infection ready to bloom. And bloom it did. When the doll was unwrapped inside the forgotten catacombs beneath an abandoned abbey, the temperature dropped to winter cold. Shadows shifted unnaturally against the stone. The robed men placed her on an altar of rotting wood and whispered the names they believed would bind her. But the doll did not need binding. She was already alive. Her head tilted. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. The flames snuffed out one by one, leaving only darkness. And in that darkness, something else stirred. A voice, low and mocking, rolled through the catacombs. You should not have brought her here. The monks froze. Their leader stepped back, clutching his cross with trembling hands. From the shadows, the figure appeared, a woman in a nun's habit, face pale as death, eyes black as tar. Valak. The doll twitched on the altar. A giggle cut the silence. Two evils had met. And Romania, already scarred, would never be the same. The abbey walls shook as though the stones themselves recoiled from what had entered. The monks, gathered in trembling prayer, fell to their knees as the temperature plunged lower than the dead of winter. Their breath curled in the air, heavy and visible, while the candles that had just died sputtered to life again, but now their flames burned black. On the altar sat Annabelle, her cracked smile frozen in something almost gleeful. Yet the silence that followed was not hers. It belonged to the other presence. Valak stepped forward from the shadows, her pale face stretched into a mockery of serenity, lips pulled in a grin that had no warmth. The crucifix on the wall behind her turned upside down with a loud snap, the wood cracking as though broken by invisible hands. The monks gasped. One dared whisper, "The demon of the abbey." Valak's eyes flickered toward him, and he convulsed. His body twisted violently, his bones snapping inside his skin like dry sticks. Blood leaked from his mouth as his neck bent in an impossible angle. He collapsed in silence, his cross clattering to the floor beside him. Annabelle's giggle sliced through the darkness, sharp and mocking. The doll's head slowly tilted, her painted eyes locking onto Valak's. It was a stare between predators. Valak hissed, her voice thick with contempt. "This is my ground. You are nothing but a parasite clinging to clay and cloth. Leave, or I will tear your wretched essence into ash." The doll did not move. Yet from her, something stirred. The air thickened, pressing against the lungs of every man in the room. Shadows warped and twisted on the walls, faces forming out of the dark stone, screaming mouths, hollow sockets for eyes, hands clawing outward. Malthus, the demon bound to Annabelle, made himself known. One monk screamed and tried to run. The shadows caught him. His body was dragged across the floor, clawed hands sinking into his flesh, tearing strips away. His scream turned to a wet gurgle as he was pulled into the wall, vanishing into the stone as though it had swallowed him whole. Valak's grin widened. So the dog bares its teeth. Her hand lifted. The black flames erupted higher, licking the vaulted ceiling. Her habit billowed as if underwater, and the sound of 1,000 voices chanting in reverse echoed through the abbey. The monks covered their ears, blood pouring from them as the unholy litany filled the air. The doll began to move. Annabelle's tiny porcelain hands scraped against the wood of the altar. Her legs twitched, jerking in sharp, puppet-like movements. She stood. Her painted smile did not change, but the shadows wrapped around her body like armor, lifting her from the ground. Her head twisted all the way around in a grotesque spin, then snapped back into place. From the doll's mouth, a voice poured forth, deep, guttural, ancient. Not the playful giggle of a child, but the roar of Malthus. "You call yourself queen of this land? You mock the holy with your veil? Then know this, I have crossed oceans to claim it from you. This ground is mine now." The walls cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. Valak's eyes burned with hellish fire. "Mine." The collision erupted. The shadows surged from Annabelle like a tide of ink, flooding the catacombs. Valak's form expanded, her body towering to fill the entire chamber, habit stretching like wings. The monks screamed as they were ripped apart between forces they could not understand. Some burned alive where they stood, their flesh melting like wax. Others were seized by invisible claws and hung in the air, crucified against the walls. One tried to clutch his rosary and chant a prayer, but the words turned to screams as his own beads slid like snakes down his throat, choking him until his eyes bulged and his body went limp. The abbey itself could not withstand the battle. Stone cracked and split, mosaics of saints crumbled into dust, and the altar shattered beneath Annabelle's feet. Yet the doll did not fall. She floated higher, wrapped in a cocoon of black energy, her eyes glowing faintly red. Valak's laughter boomed through the catacombs, echoing like 1,000 voices at once. Then let us see which of hell's children is strongest. Annabelle's giggle followed, shrill and cruel. The monks who remained fell to the floor, clawing their faces, ripping their own eyes out to escape the sight. Blood pooled across the stone, mixing with wax and ashes. And in that cursed place, a war of shadows and fire began. The abbey did not survive the first night. When dawn tried to rise, the sun was swallowed by storm clouds that did not move with the wind. A permanent dusk fell over the countryside, broken only by the crackle of lightning that painted the broken spires in ghostly flashes. Where the abbey once stood, there was now a ruin half swallowed into the earth. Its bells had melted into jagged lumps of iron, and the crucifix that once crowned its highest peak now lay twisted, blackened, and inverted in the rubble. But the evil had not stayed contained. It spread. Villagers in the valley below were the first to feel it. Their animals screamed all night, their eyes glowing red before they dropped dead with no wounds on their bodies. Wells turned black. Children awoke crying with claw marks on their skin, though no one had touched them. An old priest tried to bless the fields, but when he raised his crucifix, it grew hot in his hand until his skin blistered. He dropped it, horrified, as the metal sank into the soil like it was being swallowed. The people whispered of the abbey awakening again. They didn't know it wasn't the abbey, they didn't know that two demons were tearing reality apart. Annabelle moved first. The doll was seen in homes, sitting silently in rocking chairs that rocked by themselves. Farmers found her perched atop scarecrows, her head tilted at impossible angles as crows pecked their own eyes out in her presence. Every sighting left behind bodies, families lying lifeless at their tables, their faces frozen in smiles carved far too wide. Malthus was extending his curse across the valley. Every victim was another soul claimed, another shadow added to his army. But Valak was not passive. The villagers soon began seeing her figure in the woods, nun's habit swaying in the mist, her eyes glinting white from the dark. At first, she came silently, watching. Then she began to act. Churches collapsed from within. Priests who tried to bless homes were found crucified upside down on their own altars. The villagers fled into the mountains, but wherever they went, the shadow of the nun was there. And in every place Valak struck, Annabelle followed, her giggles echoing like a taunt. The land itself became the battlefield. It began in Saint-Georges, a small village clustered around a stone church older than memory. When the bells tolled without hands to ring them, the villagers gathered outside in fear. From the tree-line came the faint sound of children's laughter, yet no children were there. Then they saw her, Annabelle, sitting on the church steps, her porcelain face cracked, her eyes locked on the people who dared approach. The priest clutched his Bible and stepped forward. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy. The doors of the church slammed open. Valak stood inside, her figure framed by the unnatural darkness. The black flames of the candles cast her pale face in flickering light. She raised her hand, and the priest's Bible burst into fire in his grip. He screamed as his skin melted to ash, collapsing in front of his people. Panic erupted. The doll's laughter rang through the air as Malthus unleashed his curse. The shadows of the villagers stretched, grew long, and broke free from their owners. The shadows turned on the living, strangling them, dragging them into the soil where they kicked and clawed before silence took them. Valak responded with mockery of holiness. The church bells tolled again, but instead of sound, they screamed, the tortured cries of all who had ever died in that place. Blood seeped from the bell tower and rained down on the crowd below. Children ran. Mothers screamed. Fathers tried to fight shadows with pitchforks and torches, but the torches went out, the pitchforks turned to rust in their hands. And then the two forces collided. Malthus manifested fully through Annabelle, the doll levitating above the church steps, shrouded in writhing black smoke, her eyes blazing red. From her came legions of twisted spirits, eyeless and skeletal, crawling from the soil like worms. Valak expanded into her monstrous form, towering over the church, her arms stretching into wings of shadow that blotted out the sky. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, vomiting a river of pale, wailing faces that drowned the churchyard in horror. The village was caught in the crossfire. Houses ignited in black fire that did not burn wood but flesh. Roads cracked open, swallowing entire families whole. The church itself collapsed as Malthus and Valak tore at each other, their powers twisting the very fabric of reality. The last thing the villagers saw was the sky splitting. Not with light, but with darkness so thick it seemed alive. By the time night fell, there was no Saint-Georges. No survivors. Only ruins, blood, and whispers that never stopped. And yet, this was only the first battle. Valak wanted dominion. Malthus wanted conquest. Neither would yield. Romania was becoming their war ground, and the world itself was beginning to bend under their clash. Hell was not coming. It was already here. The slaughter in Saint-Georges spread like plague. Word carried on trembling lips, and panic bled into the surrounding villages. People fled into the forests, into mountains, anywhere that was not the valley where the abbey once stood. But the evil was faster. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, following them. Crucifixes toppled from their resting places. Wells ran with blood instead of water. The Holy See in Rome heard the rumors. Whispers of the nun of Carta Abbey rising again. Whispers of the cursed doll stolen from America, now unleashing her poison in Romania. A conclave was called, and holy men debated for days. In the end, they sent a small order of priests into the countryside with one goal, to enter the ancient catacombs beneath the ruined abbey and cut out the infection before it spread farther. They went with relics, splinters of the true cross, vials of holy water, and the bones of saints. They went with faith. They went with fear. None of them would return. The catacombs stretched for miles under the ruins. Narrow tunnels carved into ancient stone, walls lined with skulls and bones of the dead. The priests carried lanterns that barely held back the dark. With each step deeper, the air grew heavier, pressing against their lungs until breathing felt like swallowing earth. Father Marco, their leader, raised his rosary high. "Stay close," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "We walk into the pit of the enemy." The chanting started soon after. Low at first, as if from far away, then closer, closer. The sound was not in Latin, nor any language known to man. It crawled into their ears and made their skulls ache. The youngest priest began to cry silently, his tears streaking dirt down his face. They turned a corner and found her. Annabelle sat in the middle of the catacombs, placed carefully upon an altar of bones. Her head tilted, her eyes reflecting their lantern light like living orbs. Behind her, the shadows writhed on the walls, whispering, laughing. "Destroy it," one of the priests cried. He rushed forward, smashing his vial of holy water against the doll. The water sizzled, steam filling the tunnel. For a moment, there was silence. Then Annabelle's jaw snapped open with a crack far too wide, and the steam turned to black smoke. The priest was engulfed. When it cleared, only his robes remained, soaked in blood, his body gone. The others screamed prayers. The shadows responded. Figures crawled from the walls, eyeless and grinning, their mouths opening wider and wider until their jaws split. They lunged at the priests, dragging them into the dark. Bones cracked, flesh tore, holy relics shattered. The tunnels shook as though the earth itself was trying to seal them in. Then the lanterns went out. From deeper still came Valak. The priests didn't see her at first, only the flutter of cloth, the faint scent of decay and lilies. Then she emerged, impossibly tall, her face glowing pale in the dark, her eyes burning. With hatred. She raised her hand, and the screaming shadows froze, twisting into grotesque crucifixion poses against the walls. Annabelle giggled from her altar, the sound bouncing endlessly through the catacombs. Valak's voice rolled like thunder, "This land is mine. You defile it." The doll's head snapped in a sharp, jerking motion. From her mouth poured Malthus's guttural roar, "Then try and take it from me." The catacombs split with violence. Bones erupted from the walls, spearing through priests like paper. Skulls shattered under unseen hands. The tunnels filled with black fire that burned without heat, fire that consumed faith itself. The priests tried to hold their relics high, but their crosses turned upside down, their rosaries crumbled to ash, their prayers turned into choking coughs of blood. Father Marcoux alone remained alive long enough to witness the battle. He fell to his knees, staring at the two forces. In the dim flicker of unholy light, he saw Valak's towering form clashing against the writhing mass of shadows that surrounded Annabelle. He saw reality bend, the walls of the catacombs stretching, twisting into endless spirals that led nowhere. He saw the dead stir in their graves, their skeletal hands reaching out of the walls. And worst of all, he saw the veil thin. For a moment, he glimpsed what lay beyond. Not heaven. Not hell. Something worse. A void filled with countless faces screaming silently, pressed against an invisible barrier, desperate to pour through. His sanity broke. He clawed his own eyes out, laughing and sobbing as blood streamed down his face. The last thing he heard was Annabelle's giggle blending with Valak's mocking laughter. Then the catacombs collapsed. When villagers came days later, drawn by the sound of bells tolling underground, they found nothing but rubble and tunnels choked with bone dust. No priests. No relics. But at night, the ground itself whispered. And if one listened too long, they could hear both voices, childlike laughter, and a nun's hissing chant. The war was no longer hidden beneath the earth. It was rising. The war no longer hid in ruins and shadows. It spilled into the open world. By the time autumn fell across Romania, the countryside had become a graveyard. Villages vanished overnight, their homes left standing but their people gone. Windows rattled with unseen laughter, doors creaked open by themselves, and streets filled with black smoke that never cleared. At dawn, the fields lay littered with bodies, contorted, broken, mouths split into ghastly smiles. Word reached the Romanian government. Panic spread. Soldiers were sent in convoys with rifles, flamethrowers, and tanks. Helicopters flew over forests and rivers, searching for whatever force had turned the region into a wasteland. But no bullet could kill what they faced. In one village, a battalion of 50 men entered at dawn. By sunset, only silence remained. When reinforcements arrived, they found the tanks twisted into knots of steel, rifles bent into spirals, and bodies lined in perfect rows at the foot of the church. Every corpse wore a habit sewn from its own skin. And on the church's steps sat Annabelle. Her doll's face cracked wider, almost as if smiling at their discovery. Malthus moved with disease, spreading his curse like fire. Wherever Annabelle appeared, shadows came alive. Corpses rose and walked, twisted into mockeries of the living. Children giggled in the dark, though no children lived. He was building an army, feeding on fear, binding souls into his dominion. But Valak was not idle. The nun struck openly, her monstrous form towering in flames. Cathedrals collapsed at her passing. Icons of saints wept blood until their stone faces crumbled. Priests who dared to stand in her way were found strung upside down from their own steeples, their tongues nailed to their chests. In Bucharest, the air itself carried her hymn, a chorus of voices chanting backwards through every radio, every television, every telephone. 2 demons. 2 armies. 1 land. And humanity caught in the crossfire. The climax came at Brașov, where soldiers fortified the ancient citadel in desperation. They lined the walls with holy relics, crucifixes, and salt. The city's priests blessed the streets, sprinkling holy water until the cobblestones glistened wet. Families huddled inside cellars, praying, their voices trembling. At first, silence. Then came the bells. The citadel's ancient tower rang without hands to ring it. Soldiers froze, gripping their rifles. Priests fell to their knees, whispering prayers faster, louder. And then the sky split. From the east came Valak, her veil fluttering against a storm of black clouds, her eyes glowing like white fire. She towered over the citadel, her shadow stretching across every street. She raised her arms, and the relics nailed to the walls burst into flames, turning holy icons into smoldering ash. From the west came Annabelle. She sat atop a broken carriage pulled by corpses, her doll's eyes glistening red. Around her crawled dozens of twisted spirits, howling, dragging their long fingers across the cobblestones. Behind her rose shadows shaped like skeletal giants, faceless and screaming, their mouths opening wide enough to swallow the night. The soldiers opened fire. Bullets tore through the air, tracers lighting the dark. Flamethrowers roared, fire sweeping across the streets. For a moment, the flames consumed everything, shadows burned, corpses crumbled, the doll disappeared in the inferno. But then the fire froze midair, hanging motionless. Slowly, it reversed, flowing backward, sucking into the nozzles of the flamethrowers. The soldiers screamed as the weapons exploded, incinerating them in molten fire. Their charred bones clattered across the streets, still twitching. Valak laughed, her voice booming through every alleyway. Annabelle giggled in response. The city tore itself apart. The ground cracked open, vomiting black water that swallowed homes whole. The citadel walls collapsed, dragging screaming families into the rubble. Shadows strangled soldiers, twisting their faces into grotesque grins. Valak summoned a hurricane of ash and bones, ripping the skin from those who still clung to prayer. A priest held high his relic, a shard of the true cross. For a moment it glowed, a blinding light piercing the chaos. Soldiers rallied, screaming with hope. Then Annabelle's head turned. The relic shattered in his hands, splinters tearing through his flesh. The light died instantly. He dropped to his knees, his face stretched into a smile that split his cheeks ear to ear. Blood poured down his chin as he laughed like a child until his body collapsed. The people broke. Those who survived fled the city, their screams echoing into the mountains. The citadel burned. The streets ran with rivers of blood. And above it all, Valak and Malthus raged against each other, two storms colliding, tearing Brașov into a ruin that no map would ever mark again. By dawn, the city was gone. And the war had only just begun. The land itself no longer knew peace. Mountains cracked like glass, rivers ran black, and the sky split in veins of red lightning. No village remained untouched, some vanished in a single night, their fields left empty, their homes standing but hollow, as if every soul had been carved out of existence. Others lingered, but their inhabitants were shells, smiling corpses that rocked in chairs, humming lullabies to no one. Romania had become a battlefield for gods of the pit. And now, the veil between worlds began to break. It started with time. In Brașov's ruins, soldiers' watches spun backward, then forward, then stopped entirely. The sun rose twice in one day. A child ran to her mother in the forest, but before she could reach her, she dissolved into ash, blown away on the wind. Families began hearing the voices of their dead loved ones calling from inside mirrors, coaxing them closer until the glass cracked and skeletal hands dragged them through. At night, the moon was gone. In its place hung a gaping hole, a wound in the sky, leaking tendrils of darkness that writhed like serpents. People swore they saw faces in it, millions of them, pressed against the void, mouths open in silent screams. The barrier was tearing. Annabelle sat in the ruins of a monastery, her doll body perched upon a throne of skulls. Around her, shadows moved like an army, faceless, endless, spilling across the land like ink. From her mouth, Malthus spoke in a voice that made stone vibrate. The veil grows thin. Soon all that lives will belong to me. But Valak was already there. Her laughter echoed from the heavens themselves, a chorus of nuns chanting backwards. She towered above the ruins, her habit twisting in winds that bent trees flat. With each step, graves erupted open, spilling skeletons that rose and marched under her command. Her pale face tilted upward toward the gaping wound in the sky. It will not be yours. It will be mine. The two demons clashed again, but this time, their power rippled through reality itself. The ground bled. Walls of churches wept tears of molten gold. Crucifixes burst into flames and floated upward into the sky, joining the wound like offerings to an unseen god. Villages that had survived until now were pulled apart, streets stretching into infinity, houses folding in on themselves, people screaming as they fell into holes that led to nowhere. The living were no longer alone. The dead had returned. At first, they came quietly, shapes moving in fields, the faces of lost loved ones glimpsed in windows. But soon, the dead surged openly through the streets, men who had been rotting for decades, their mouths filled with worms, children with hollow eyes and broken bones, priests who had died in faith now chanting prayers in reverse. Families embraced their lost only to be torn apart. Corpses kissed mothers with lips full of maggots. Fathers opened their arms to children who dragged them into graves. The living and the dead merged until no one could tell who still belonged to the world. And at the center of it all, Annabelle and Valak. Their war tore the veil further with every clash. When Valak screamed, the skies filled with blood. When Annabelle laughed, shadows swallowed entire mountainsides. Each one grew stronger from the chaos, feeding on fear, on death, on the unraveling of creation itself. And humanity was powerless. The Vatican sent its last effort, dozens of exorcists, relics, soldiers, scholars of the occult. They arrived in a caravan, chanting in unison, armed with crosses, swords, and every holy weapon known to man. For a moment, the people who still survived believed salvation had come. But salvation did not exist anymore. The caravan entered the valley where the abbey had stood. Within an hour, screams echoed across the hills. By nightfall, the priests were crucified upside down on the remains of their own vehicles, their blood dripping into the soil, spelling words in a language no one should read. The relics turned black. The crosses wept blood. The soldiers tore each other apart, laughing as they died. The war was not between good and evil. It was between evil and evil. And all that was holy was already dead. The wound in the sky widened, a hole bleeding across the stars. Through it, countless hands pressed outward, clawing to enter. Faces pressed against the barrier until their features split and melted together, forming a mass of screaming flesh. Annabelle's voice boomed through every shadow. Open. Open the door. Valak spread her arms wide. Yes. Tear the veil. Let them all in. And reality obeyed. The reckoning had begun. The sky was gone. The wound had widened into a cosmic maw, swallowing stars, bleeding shadows across the heavens. Time no longer moved forward, days and nights blurred into a single, endless twilight. The earth trembled without pause, and rivers of blood carved new paths through cities that once thrived. Humanity no longer fought. Humanity fled, hid, prayed, and screamed. But there was nowhere to run. Annabelle's army of shadows poured through every village and city. They filled the cracks of buildings, poured through keyholes, and seeped into the lungs of men and women, hollowing them from the inside until they stood smiling, empty, puppets dancing to Malthus' will. Valak's dead marched beside them, skeletons, corpses, saints and sinners alike, ripped from their graves. They carried banners of torn skin, their chants shaking the mountains. Their hollow eyes saw everything, devouring the last hope from the living. Together, the armies of shadow and corpse spread across the earth like a disease. Not as enemies. Not as rivals. But as fuel. Annabelle and Valak no longer battled one another, they battled reality itself. Their power had grown too vast, too cosmic. Now, they devoured in unison, each strike tearing holes in existence, each scream unraveling creation. The war had become something greater, an ending. Vatican City burned. The Pope himself led the last procession, carrying the cross of St. Peter into St. Peter's Square. Thousands knelt, chanting, begging for light, for God to intervene. For one moment, the air grew warm. The clouds parted. And a voice seemed to whisper across the sky. But then the cross snapped in two. The Pope's body twisted backward until his spine cracked out of his skin. His voice, now guttural and hollow, joined the chant of the dead. The crowd followed, one by one, their prayers turning into shrieks of mockery, their bodies writhing as shadows claimed them. The Vatican became a nest of horror, its bells tolling backward, each strike summoning more of the abyss. Across the world, it was the same. In America, cities split in half, swallowed by darkness pouring upward from the sewers. In Asia, towers bent like wax, their windows opening like mouths to consume those who hid inside. In Africa, deserts bloomed with flesh, fields of pulsing hearts beating in the sand. In Australia, oceans rose as walls of black water filled with writhing corpses that never drowned. There was no safe place left. No holy ground. No salvation. And at the center of it all, in Romania's ruined abbey, Annabelle and Valak stood side by side beneath the wound in the sky. Their forms had grown beyond recognition. Annabelle was no longer a doll, her porcelain skin had cracked open, revealing an endless pit of teeth and eyes that rotated like gears. Valak no longer resembled a nun, her body stretched miles high, her veil spreading like wings that covered the horizon. Together, they were not rivals. They were architects of ruin. And the wound above them tore wide. Something waited beyond. Hands the size of mountains clawed at the edges of the tear. Eyes larger than cities blinked open in the void. A mouth wider than oceans yawned, its breath snuffing out stars. The things outside reality had waited for this moment, for the veil to be broken, for the door to be opened. And now it was open. The first of them stepped through. A shadow taller than the sky itself, made of writhing bodies fused together, screaming in unison. Behind it, a sea of horrors pressed forward, beasts with no names, gods of forgotten nightmares, things humanity had never dared to imagine. Annabelle bowed. Valak spread her arms wide. Together, they whispered, "Welcome home." The world collapsed. Continents split and sank into black seas. Cities folded like paper and vanished into the void. Humanity screamed as one, their voices echoing into the abyss before being cut short, their bodies unraveling into threads of nothing. The stars were eaten. The sky became a canvas of crawling flesh and infinite teeth. Time ended. And in the silence after, in the void that remained, two voices echoed in laughter. Annabelle's shrill, childlike giggle. Valak's guttural, nun-like chant. Both blending, forever. For there was no earth anymore. No heaven. No hell. Only them.